For this video, I'm mainly going to be expressing my opinions on what I feel is effective for improvement. Some of the footage will be irrelevant, but most of it will be relevant to what I'll be explaining. Understanding how you like to effectively take in information will be important for learning the game faster. It can be either through extensive research and then testing it or figuring it out as you go. The main thing is to make sure to somewhat have a goal in mind in order to prevent too much sidetracking. Something to consider when starting a game is to think about what you find enjoyable during it. It can be a long-term goal of being really good, or simply a visual that's satisfying to see. Make sure to keep these things in mind so that if you happen to question why you're playing, you can at least quantify the reasons why you started in the first place. Sometimes using a video that got you excited for the game you're interested in can help with extending the motivation that you have. If the hype factor is all you need, then watching it as many times as you need, or even just a small section of the video. Maybe the song is what's doing it for you. In that case, listen to it over and over as you practice. Playing a new game and then complaining about it being too hard is silly. I feel that with any new game you're going to try, there's going to be some amount of difficulty. If you're immediately destroying enemies with ease in a game you just started, then it's probably way too easy for your skill level, or the game was built to be easy in the first place. But you can't expect to be instantly good at every game you pick up. Accept that you'll be bad for the time being and stick with it. If not, then go play something else. It is worth keeping in mind that sometimes games can be somewhat unfair at times. In those cases, you have to find a way around it or come to terms with it. Being present while playing is something that you should be doing while training. Try to not let your muscle memory take over too often. The more present you are to what is happening, the more information you'll be taking in after each round of attempts. You should be actively planning for what you should be doing next, based on what just happened. If you're not doing that, then you're most likely running on autopilot. If you're running on autopilot, you're probably subconsciously filtering out important details during each attempt. This will make your round of attempts less productive. When you have a goal, it is important to break it down into pieces that are understandable. You don't immediately bake a cake, you have to acquire a recipe and then build it properly. Even with the idea of a cake, you need to know what kind of cake you want to bake. This will determine what is necessary to acquire and what the steps will be. When you're coming up with the idea to be a really good player, you need to put your ideas together, what you think a good player looks like, and or what is considered good gameplay by others. These will be the ingredients for your own cake. After gathering the various recipes from other players, you can start to put your own spin on the cake you want to make. It is important that you develop your base well so that your cake does not become deformed. So train the fundamentals well and layer it with the combined ideas of the recipes. If you were to work towards not taking damage during fights, you will need to figure out the variables that would affect it. One thing you can do to make this possible is develop your positioning skills. Be in the right spot as often as possible and you won't get hit. The next thing to think about is making the fight as short as possible. The longer the fight, the more chances for the enemy to hit you and ruin the run. Another thing to consider is making the fight consistent with a well-tested method. In order to make sure it is consistent, you'll need to test each method multiple times until you determine which one is the most reliable. It's very important that you try to figure out certain things for yourself. Being creative while staying within the rules of the game will develop a better understanding of what you can do. If you're constantly looking at guides rather than studying the game yourself, you could be robbing yourself of understanding how some fundamental things work, which will eventually need to be used to build up into advanced level techniques. For example, after moving forward or sliding in Razor's Edge, Ryu will jump forward. You can prevent this by letting go of the stick and waiting, but by drawing your bow and letting go of the stick, this will allow you to neutral jump sooner rather than waiting. This property can be intuitively understood while playing when you're frantically trying to shoot something. So with this in mind, you can start to ask yourself, if I can use this to transition out of moves, can I use it to transition into a move? After pressing a few buttons, you'll discover that you can jump out of the bow stance. Now with the knowledge of how the bow can be used in a different way than its obvious use, you may use it for inertia control and as another way to initiate aerial or on-landing attacks. Ranking systems aren't too important when you're starting out. By focusing on the bad ranks that you are receiving during your first playthrough, it can make your experience less enjoyable. Once you're very familiar with the game through multiple playthroughs, then you can start to focus on improving your rankings. After each playthrough, you'll probably get better ranks without trying anyway. At times, score can be a better measure of how well you are playing the game. The style meter or medals that a game will show you are a basic metric of how well you're playing. The numerical result that is shown at the end of a battle or a level is a measurable way to see how well you did within the game system. A bare minimum pure platinum score won't generate as much money as a pure platinum run that did more score building before cashing in. If you've played a shmup, killing the boss as soon as possible would be the normal thing to do, but by breaking the parts off or making the fight last longer, you'll be able to gain a lot more points than you would otherwise. Depending on the game, it'll make things more difficult in the short term, but in the long term it can be beneficial for building resources. Styling or doing more than what is expected in games can be a way that the player shows their knowledge and skills with the game. By being able to play with your enemies, it shows how much control you're able to display in battle. Being able to make an enemy live longer by utilizing your weaker techniques can be both cool and good for points. Another thing about engaging in style play is that it's mainly for fun, so it's just another way to engage with the game's mechanics if playing for score is not your thing. Ranking systems in action games usually have the ability to be easily abused. Players have developed consistent methods to rack up a lot of points without much effort. When a player only knows how to do this and not meet the score requirement in any other way, it tends to make their accomplishment less impressive. They essentially did it to say that they met the requirement even though they really didn't try. When starting out, you shouldn't feel like you have to grind sessions. By starting with a few minutes of training for a while, playing the game will turn into a routine. This is better than relying on bursts of motivation. After a while, you'll feel more comfortable playing it for longer, and you'll be able to increase the duration of your sessions. 30 minutes to 1 hour is a reasonable amount of time to train or grind attempts, as long as you get into it with a plan and stay focused. Because practice makes permanent, it would be a good idea to constantly redo sections of a game in order to solidify what you're trying to work on. Breaking the full section of a game down to small sections of training would be a better idea instead of doing the whole thing over and over. This allows you to save time and be more focused on building good habits while building up to a full run. Once you're ready for a full run, you'll have reduced how hard you have to think about performing what you've already planned. During your practice sessions, it is important to think about how difficult the thing is that you're currently doing. If the fights you are doing are not that difficult and require a low amount of attention, then you're not really working on your ability to improve at the game. You are instead maintaining your current skill level and reinforcing habits. This in itself isn't a bad thing, but it can be an issue whenever you decide to move up in difficulty because some games will punish a method that was viable in the previous difficulty. So it's important to occasionally do something that challenges your ability as a player. It doesn't have to be anything major like a restrictive challenge. It can be as simple as trying weapons that you're very unfamiliar with. You can also think of this like exercising. If you aren't pushing yourself periodically, then you won't hit any major gains that will improve your fitness. Playing to get through a fight is very different from playing to figure it out. The former is not very thorough and mainly involves you doing whatever it takes to get through the current roadblock. The thing about each fight is that it is a journey to take in because each one has the potential to teach you new solutions or give you ideas of how to deal with future fights. So when you go online and find whatever trick that trivializes a fight, then you're robbing yourself of the development process. Even if you don't look up how to deal with a fight and instead run it with the same strategy until it works, then you're still stuck not knowing much else about the fight and run the risk of getting stuck when you have to do it again. During your training, you can passively build your muscle memory in reaction to specific interactions or actively develop it. If you go with the passive route, then you'll mainly be building on top of habits that you've already developed through playing normally. If you go with the active route, then you'll need to repetitively train the same interaction with intention over and over until you don't have to think about it anymore. By making challenges for yourself, you make it possible to develop an understanding of the game past what is commonly known. A decent amount of people won't deviate from a method that is recognized as very effective. This leads to a very narrow understanding of your character's toolset. Even if your other options aren't on par with the common method, you'll at least know a few more things that will help with getting more out of the game. In a very basic example, you can limit the amount of healing items you can use in a fight. By reducing the amount that you can use, you'll end up thinking more in depth about when you should heal, and this will force you to develop a better strategy that requires you not to take damage as often. When designing a challenge for yourself, it should be reasonable. The difficulty of the challenge should only be a little more difficult than what you normally do. The scenario should have something you can easily manage mixed in with something you are not quite consistent with yet. An example would be if you were learning how to use a weapon against enemies that you could easily defeat with a different weapon. Alternatively, if you were integrating a new technique, you would use the weapons you are familiar with and try to add a new trick while making the least amount of mistakes. Trying different difficulties can provide the player with a new experience in their game. Higher difficulties usually add modifications to the previous experience. If you decide to experience these changes, then your ability to play better may increase depending on how the new difficulty works. When the change is based on rebalancing player and enemy damage, then the experience won't be much different. But what will be different is that you already know how to handle the same fights. The new demand is trying to figure out how to optimize damage and consistency while avoiding the increased damage from enemies. For games with remix enemy rotations, it introduces you to a new experience because of how you handle a fight for each difficulty will usually be different in varying degrees. Instead of only altering the damage numbers, now stronger enemies will show up sooner and or in greater quantities. This also affects you as a player in a way that old solutions may not be as viable, or you'll need to adjust them for each new rotation of enemies. Another thing to keep in mind is that bosses may become smarter. Games are unable to teach you every possible trick because the way that you engage in combat has too many variables. Knowing your character's abilities will allow you to better control them and use what you know about them to solve difficult problems within the game. Becoming proficient with these tools available to you will make it easier to develop new solutions or ways to control them. As you experience each of these variables and think of other ways to handle each fight, you'll be closer to attaining mastery of your character. If you can consistently make the right decision without thinking too hard about it, then you can consider yourself very proficient with your character. If you are proficient in many areas of the game or able to fight each enemy with ease, then you may consider yourself at a mastery level with the game. To ensure a decent amount of progress in your training, you'll need to develop a training roadmap and figure out how to plan sessions around your schedule. Not every session has to be a play session either. The days that you are watching footage, whether it be yours or someone else's, can be considered a training session. Each time you're exposing yourself to the game, you're becoming more familiar with its contents. Designing a warm-up routine will be useful for maintaining your skill level as well as keeping some level of consistency. The warm-up session should include something that prepares your hands for techniques related to your playstyle or what you will be working on. It should also prepare your mind and reflexes to focus on the training goal for the day. The warm-up should ideally be a fight or juggle routine that is at your current skill level. Maintaining the baseline is important so that you aren't spending time de-rusting after a break. You are not expected to train every day. Taking breaks is good for your body to recover, because if you overwork yourself, you run the risk of getting hurt and taking an even longer break than expected. Spending a lot of time focusing can be quite taxing on your mind as well and can lead to burnout. Style combos can be quite intimidating to look at, but the good thing about them is that they usually build up and are based on a shorter attack with a different name at an earlier part of a longer sequence. So something you notice in Ninja Gaiden is that there are a lot of similar input routes to follow. The main thing that changes is the state that Ryu is currently in and what move he performed prior. So breaking the attack sequences down into chunks that are phases of his attack will make it easier to remember them. Also, remembering the longest sequences will make it easier to remember the sequences that build up to it as well as the routes that branch off from it. When you're learning your attacks, making a reference sheet or having a list up at all times can seem like a good idea, but you're holding yourself back from internalizing the button sequences that are required for it. You can end up learning them eventually, but it will take longer. Ideally, you should pick 1 or 2 attack sequences and practice them in a fight. This way, you will actively think about it and see how to make it work. Bayonetta has very distinct attack animations that make it very easy to understand where you are in her sequence. But by relying on seeing where she is in the sequence, you will not be as aware of the things going on around you. The character King Zero makes this very apparent because in battle it is harder to see what part of the sequence you are in. This would be like constantly relying on your GPS to get you through a routine trip. By trying to remember the route and keep things along the way, you'll develop a better understanding of how to get around. By recording your gameplay, even in small snippets, it can help you improve. With these clips, you are able to review the gameplay and pick out details to test later. With most consoles having the ability to record your gameplay, there's not much of a reason to not record your gameplay. After creating a clip that is very impressive to you, it is helpful to watch it many times and see if there are ways to make it even better. Not to say that the current clip is not good enough, but your old content can be used to create a whole new idea from your past plays, accidental or intentional. It is important to constantly evaluate your mistakes and take notes. If you don't feel like taking notes, consider saving clips of when things go wrong. You can use these clips to replay the moment that led to your mistake. This will greatly speed up your understanding of fights and enemies. Watching other people play can give you a no-stress outside view of what's going on within the game. You may even notice things that you didn't notice before as you were playing. The person may even perform something that you didn't even think or feel was possible. When you are trying to learn from other players, it will be more ideal to watch full gameplay videos rather than a compilation of short clips. The short clips are showing when everything is ideal and working. You end up missing out on the mistakes that the player makes or how they got to the point of setting up the clip you saw. This can give you a false idea that the player is better than they are. With these mistakes in mind, it should help you feel better about your own mistakes. It is very important to study a game's mechanics after it's explained to you how it works. Going past the bare minimum of performing it by trying to make it flow smoothly with other mechanics will make your gameplay better, as well as certain fights being easier. If the game doesn't explain the mechanics well or you would like to know more, then going online will be very useful. Reading forums, guides, or checking informational videos are a few ways for you to gather valuable information. How you apply the knowledge gained from something you just watched or read requires that you make some kind of note of the thing that you want to try out or keep the reference material nearby so that you can look back at it if you get confused. To effectively apply the information, you will need to figure out a scenario that you can try it in. Unless it's something for a specific enemy or area, test it in more ways than what the reference material gives you so that your understanding can go past what it may have quickly explained to you. If the material is very thorough with the information, then what you will mainly have to do is perform it enough times that it becomes committed to your long-term memory. It helps to not be afraid of sharing your gameplay to the public. You may get praise or disapproval from others, but it can help with building yourself as a player. Especially if you ask for advice from others, taking notes and trying to apply the quality advice to your gameplay can speed up the training process. Just make sure not to take the advice too personal. For each playthrough of the game, you should write notes of enemy spawns and if that particular section gives you trouble. These notes will act as a reminder of the things that need to be solved. Even though the main game has its own challenges for you to deal with, you can build your own for when the regular experience becomes easy. Sometimes there are hidden mechanics in games, you may come across them by accident. In these cases, it is worth giving it a few tries to see how well it works. You may even see something unintentional. It is important to try and be creative with how you approach a game because the ideas that you have can possibly be useful in some way. Even things that seemingly have a negative outcome in the game can actually be useful. Button mashing is typically frowned upon, but it does allow you to discover tricks for your game or make them easier to perform. In the case of Vanquish, there's a trick called the reload cancel. By swapping to a different weapon before the reload is complete, you will complete the reload much sooner. Because I tend to fidget with games that allow fast inputs, it makes this technique easier to do. In Devil May Cry 4, I have a habit of excessively cycling through my weapons while I'm waiting or bored. It seems silly, but it does help me maintain my muscle memory for how many presses I need to do so that I can select the weapon I want. Most games have set ways, but what happens after enemies move from the initial spot is mostly random. Similar to playing pool, you see what the start will look like, but what you hit in the beginning will affect how the rest of the balls will react. So after this opening has passed, you are now in a scenario where anything can happen. You are expected to be flexible in your thinking. It's really worth it to play a variety of games because there can be some degree of skill transfer. Playing rhythm games can help you with pattern recognition and timing, which is very applicable to learning the attack pattern and duration of an enemy's assault. Playing role-playing games can help you with learning resource management and priority for fights. You just have to get creative with your ideas of what can transfer between games. By proactively centering your camera near the enemy, you only need to make small adjustments towards the enemy. This is a very necessary skill in first-person shooter games. It also transfers to a third-person shooter like Vanquish. This will allow you to optimize your time in augmented reaction mode. This becomes even more important while playing God Hard mode. Developing hand shapes for techniques will be useful for making high execution techniques easier to perform. If you've played an instrument before or watched people play them, there are distinct hand shapes that make it possible to accurately hit their desired note. The same can be accomplished on a controller or keyboard. For a controller, I developed an in-sync movement of my fingers instead of trying to perform each part independently. These in-sync movements help me with transferring my technique to different control styles. For our first combat breakdown, I'll be using this challenge clip. The goal here is to use Sam's kicks to take out every enemy rather than using his sword. Something to know about Sam's kicks is that both of them have the ability to hit multiple enemies. So this allows me to stun or kill multiple enemies with one swing of the leg. Even the limbs of your enemies will make them very vulnerable. The parry kick has a rule, which is only being allowed to hit enemies twice before they die. Another thing to know is that the duration of the stun is not very long. If you only kill one of the 3 cyborgs, then only one gecko will spawn. If you kill 2 cyborgs, then both geckos will spawn. With either result, the first gecko will always shoot rockets at you, so it'll be a good idea to move away and then back to the cyborgs and wait for it to charge at you. Ideally, you'll want to kill one cyborg at a time so that you'll be able to save each of them for a gecko. So missing one while you perform a parry kick is ideal. Because otherwise you'll have to fight the remaining gecko normally. An easier way to make kicking fewer cyborgs possible is to head towards them at the start. This typically causes one of them to jump back. Alternatively, you may target the leftmost cyborg. Another reason I do this is to shorten the gap between the gecko and the cyborg so that I can perform Sam's roundhouse kick sooner. Here's a clip of when I first completed the challenge. It's close to what I wanted it to look like, so I decided to give it a few more attempts after this one. Here is the first clip again, but now you'll be able to understand what went into making it possible. If you apply the same kind of analysis of mistakes and interactions while testing, you'll be able to come up with a solution faster. For the next combat breakdown example, I'll be using Kingdom Hearts. In this fight, you'll be fighting 3 distinct enemy types. For any fight that involves a variety of enemy types, it's recommended that you fight them in isolation. This will help greatly with figuring out who to prioritize so that you'll be able to fight all of them together. Waka is your long-range attacker. His main game plan is to throw balls at you. It is worth keeping in mind that he has close-range attacks, but the main thing is to be in and out with attacks so that he's only throwing the balls. Since I was being aggressive while fighting him, I tried to see if I could deal with his close-range attacks by jumping. If you were new to the game, being able to parry the attacks of your enemies with an attack of your own would seem like a surprise. This surprise is very useful as it will cancel their attack. It may also be used to deflect the balls. If you've played Metal Gear Rising before, then you'll know that by attacking and holding a direction towards the attacker, you'll be able to parry enemies. You may also deflect projectiles with well-timed swings like in Kingdom Hearts. So with the ideas tested, it is now time to decide on how I want to deal with Waka. The plan I decided on will be to continuously deflect the balls so that he stays stunned. Tidus, who is going to be your close range attacker. He's easy to deal with because he mainly runs at you until he's close enough to hit you. So all you really have to do is bait an attack out of him and retaliate. Selphie is a mid-range attacker. She uses a jump rope as a whip and it creates a decent gap between you and her while also copying my strategy of hit and run. So going in for counters can be tricky. Since the deflected balls can stun whoever's in the way of it, it's usually best to leave them be and focus on the other active attackers, because a temporary 1 vs 2 is better than a 1 vs 3. Following the method of leading them around while stunning Waka is a simple way to go about the fight. Near the end of one of my attempts, I was having issues with safely attacking Sophie. I didn't have a reliable way to deal with her wide swing. The main way that I dealt with it at the time was to stay out of its range and wait it out. As you can see, it didn't work out very well. So the obvious thing to do here is to fight her in isolation again and come up with a better plan. The new plan for fighting her is to jump over her and attack while she does her wide swing. This will air stall over her or parry her attack. It will also cut her attack short because games that usually have rushing attacks will cut short or break their tracking once they are close enough to the player. Now that I have figured out how to deal with it, it's time to give the fight another go.
You ready? I'm good. Come on. Come on.
The main thing to take from this example is that the better you know how to deal with individual enemies in a fight, the easier it will be to handle them in a variety of enemy compositions. Now that I have explained my opinions about what I feel is necessary for improvement in action games, I'm hoping that you will now have a better understanding of what can be utilized so you're improving your game of choice. I would also like to say thank you for helping me reach 1,000 subscribers. It is quite a surprise to me as the series was created mainly as a passion project and reference for people with questions regarding the genre. Thanks for watching, and